I think there are these blurry lines when you work in a profession that you are passionate about and people know that you're passionate about. It's similar in the dance world. Sometimes I see it in the yoga world. I'm sure it exists in other facets of life. But like when you're passionate about it, sometimes it's hard to be like, oh yeah, but also I deserve money for it. Or yeah, also my time is worth something and I do have to have this cancellation policy.
Welcome back to Full-Time Yoga Teacher Podcast. My name is Reika and I am your host. I hope you are having a great day so far as you tune in to this podcast. If you are a returning listener, I appreciate you. I have so much gratitude. Thank you for listening. And if you are new to this podcast, welcome. Full-Time Yoga Teacher Podcast was created for yoga teachers or anyone who is interested in becoming a yoga teacher, whether you are a full-time yoga teacher or not. But these conversations and interviews I have will hopefully inspire yoga teachers to actually continue to follow what they love. And hopefully there's some tips and tricks along the way of what other full-time yoga teachers have learned in their journey that they share in this kind of interviews. When I first became a yoga teacher, I wanted to pursue this as a full-time job, and I just didn't know how. I didn't know if it was possible. I had so many questions that were unanswered that I had to kind of figure out on my own. And now that I've been teaching yoga full-time for some years and I run my own mentorship program, I try to be there to support and also answer questions for other yoga teachers who are also trying to make this into a full-time career, or just a yoga teacher who's looking for community or have some questions around being a yoga teacher. So that's kind of what this podcast is about. I mostly interview other full-time yoga teachers around the world and get them to share their stories, their journey of how they became where they are at and how they're making full-time yoga teaching career work. And what I want to highlight is that everyone's different, everyone's journey is different, and that's the beauty of being a full-time yoga teacher. There's just no one path that we are meant to follow. We kind of have to make our own path that works for you. So that's why I created this podcast. If you are enjoying this podcast, I really love hearing from listeners. So don't be shy and message me, DM me on Instagram. That's probably where I'm most active. My handle is @Reika Yoga, but you can also message me through a contact form on my website, www.reikayoga.com. I do want to share one exciting thing. The last group of yoga teacher trainers that I taught here in Peru, for those of you who's new, I'm based in Long Beach, California. That's kind of where I call home now. But I got a 4-month teaching contract and live in Peru for 4 months teaching 200-hour teacher training. It's been so much fun, and I'm learning so much about myself, about teaching, as well as learning a lot about Peru and Spanish while I'm here, which has been an amazing journey so far. So what I wanted to share was the last group of teacher trainers who came to Peru. It was a pretty big group, close to 20 students. One of the students, her name is Nicole, and if you're listening, Nicole, shout out to you, Nicole. On the first day of teacher training, we sat close to each other at dinner table, and she asked, "Hey, this might sound weird, but are you the one who does the Full-Time Yoga Teacher podcast?" And I was so excited to hear and meet people that I don't personally know who listen to the podcast. This was the first time ever that it happened. This happened to me where somebody that I don't know, who's not in my social group, who's not my friends that I have in Long Beach or wherever, who listen to this podcast, and actually came out and say, "Hey, I listened to your podcast. Are you the host of Full-Time Yoga Teacher podcast?" So thank you, Nicole, for doing that. I'm so happy our life path crossed. She didn't know that I was a host of Full-Time Yoga Teacher when she signed up for this teacher training. So it was such a wonderful way that we got to meet, and I was very excited to hear and meet somebody who's actually listened to my podcast. So that was very exciting. I want to share that excitement with you. So I know there are people out there who's listening to this podcast that I don't personally know. And although it's kind of hard to imagine that because podcasting kind of feels like I'm just talking to a void, but I appreciate you. That's all I want to say. I appreciate every single one of you who listen, whether I know you, whether you're my neighbor, my family members, or a complete strangers who keeps coming back every week to listen to this podcast. I want to say thank you and appreciate every single one of you so much. Okay, little update with my life. I just finished my third 200-hour teacher training program, and I usually go on a travel. I have about 2 weeks break, so after each teacher training, I usually go traveling for those times to kind of explore Peru, but also rebalance myself in between teacher trainings. And right now I'm in a town called Chachapoya, and it is about 6 hours drive from Moyobamba, which is a jungle town that I call home, my home in Peru. So it's about 6 hours drive away. It's a cute little town. They're known for some beautiful waterfall hikes, beautiful canyons, as well as some ruins that are a little less well known than Machu Picchu, but just as beautiful. So I'm here alone, just exploring and, enjoying my solo time here. Next week, I am going to travel with my co-teacher. We're going to an oasis in the middle of the desert near Lima. So I guess that is where I'll be next week, which I'm excited to report back. If you follow me on Instagram, I always post photos of all my travels on my feed, as well as a lot more on my stories. So if you want to follow my adventures, my traveling yoga teacher journey, Instagram is a good place to follow. And my handle is @Reika Yoga. All right, so today I have a fun interview to share with you. As some of you know, I was in a advanced teacher training program called Three's Physiyoga. And Three's Physiyoga, it was a completely online course, pre-recorded content, and we also met once or twice a month on Zoom with our cohort. And it was an amazing program where we got to learn a lot about anatomy and biomechanics and body. And what I love about this program is that it is created by a physical therapist, doctor and physical therapist, based in New York, who also became a yoga teacher. And she realized that there's some gap between a PT knowledge and skill sets and what yoga teachers know about body and anatomy and biomechanics. So she created a training, and she's a PT herself, who teaches us yoga teachers what she thinks is a very useful, beneficial knowledge and awareness that come from more of a PT lens. So I love anatomy, and I am an anatomy geek. So this training was very eye-opening, and I learned so much, and it definitely made me a better teacher, but especially a better private yoga teacher. So if anybody's looking for a good training where you can kind of learn from physical therapists and learn their skill sets and learn how to apply it into your teaching, it's a great training. They have a great teacher training. So they are Three's Physiyoga. I can link their website on the show notes if anybody want to check out their teacher training. The reason why I started talking about Three's Physiyoga is because in this interview I'm sharing with you today, I interviewed Marisa, and I met Marisa in this teacher training program. Like I said, we met on Zoom once or twice a month. She lives in New York City, and as soon as I found out that she is a full-time yoga teacher in New York, I couldn't resist but ask her to be interviewed for the podcast. I have interviewed Britt in the past, who is a private yoga teacher based in Brooklyn, New York. And Marisa is the second person I get to interview who is a full-time yoga teacher in New York. I think it's kind of interesting to compare the differences and similarities of full-time yoga teacher in LA versus New York City. And if you remember Olga I interviewed, who lives out of her van, and she road trips all around Europe as she teach yoga online, and mostly private yoga online. So Olga was also my classmate, part of my cohort for Three's Physiyoga as well. So Marisa, that you're about to hear from, she was also part of the 3 Physio Yoga program that I was in. So let me tell you a little bit about her. I'm very excited to introduce you to amazing, inspiring yoga teacher and mover. Her name is Marisa. She began her journey in Philadelphia at age of 5 as a dancer. Her passion for dance led her to New York, where she earned her BFA in dance from Fordham University. Her dance career has taken her across the US and internationally, allowing her to use movement as means of outreach and intercultural exchange. After a dance injury, she discovered yoga, initially drawn to its physical challenges. However, she soon found profound emotional and mental benefits, which inspired her to share these with others. She completed her 200-hour Vinyasa certification at Yoga Vida and pursued further advanced training in various specialized areas, including Iyengar, trauma sensitivity, restorative yoga, and Physiyoga. Teaching full-time, she has connected with students worldwide and taught at renowned studios in New York. She also mentors budding yoga teachers and hosts retreats globally. Her teaching is ever evolving, deeply rooted in the healing power of movement and mindfulness. And she is passionate about making yoga accessible to everyone. Let's welcome Marisa, this dedicated and inspirational yoga teacher. Welcome, Marisa, for coming to join me on the Full-Time Yoga Teacher podcast. I'm so happy that I get to have this conversation with you today. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me, Reika. I'm so excited to get to talk to you.
Me too. Can you tell the listener where are you logging in from?
Yeah, I'm in Manhattan in New York City. Currently in the East Village where I live.
And is that where you're from?
No, I grew up in Philadelphia, or right outside Philadelphia, and I lived there till I was 17. And then I moved to New York for college. So now I'm at the halfway point where I've lived half of my life in New York, which is kind of amazing.
Wow. I feel like I hear a lot of people say once you live in New York, it's really hard to leave. Is that true?
I think so. I can see it. It's a little bit, the energy is so contagious that you get almost addicted to the energy of it and the stimulation. Mm-hmm. But I have to say now that time is going on, I'm also craving a little bit more sometimes slowing down and nature. And I could also see myself living elsewhere too.
Yeah. I can totally relate because I moved to LA for college when I was 18. I just wanted to get out of Colorado so bad. I just wanted to get out. I wanted to go to the big city. And now that I've been there for on and off for, I don't know, over 10 years, I'm craving more slower pace of life, being closer to nature. And yeah, living in LA has this kind of energy of hustle, work, strive for success and more money. And yeah, I don't know how New York is but is it similar?
Oh, yeah. Have you visited here ever?
I have been to New York City once in my life. It was 2010.
Okay. So you have to come visit sometime, first of all.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's bustling. It's kind of like you imagine it. There's a lot going on. Everything is very fast-paced. It's funny because I always say, when I've traveled somewhere else and I come back, my reaction is always why is everybody walking so fast? And then 3 days later, I'm why is everyone walking so slow? Because now I'm the fast one. But you do find your pockets in the city, I think. If you're coming as a tourist, everything feels so big. Everything feels very overwhelming and you could go any which way. And once you have a life here, you have your places that you go to, you have your subway lines that you ride, your coffee shops you go to. So it does settle a little bit. And I'm very lucky because I live in an area called Stuytown, which is it's a little bit insulated from the rest of the city. It's almost like living on a little campus or in a little park. So I don't have any outside traffic around me, which is really nice. And that's been really helpful too, just to have a place I can go to quiet down.
Yeah, I can relate. I live in Long Beach, which is part of LA County, but I feel like we're a little separate bubble of LA. And if I don't have to ever leave Long Beach. I don't need to go to Santa Monica or Hollywood. I don't need to go get out of Long Beach. I can just stay in Long Beach and I'm very happy there. And it has a very cool, very down to earth community there. So yeah, I'm sure New York has its own cute little communities and pockets here and there.
Yeah, and I think it's so important too, like when you're running around all the time and giving a lot of energy and everything, to have a place you can come to, especially one that you call home, that you can like restore in and settle a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. So tell me, when did you first started practicing yoga? How did you get introduced to yoga?
So I'll start by saying that I've been a dancer my whole life since I was 5, and I studied it very seriously through high school and through college. And my first introduction to yoga was through some summer dance intensives when I was in my teenage years. So it's a big thing that, especially in the ballet world, you'll go away to another city or something and you'll spend like a 5-week intensive there. And oftentimes they have yoga included as part of the program. So you're doing a ton of like dance classes, but then they also have some like what they call body conditioning classes. So my first introduction to yoga, to be completely honest, I would have said I hated it. I was like not interested at all. And I think it's because I was a young dancer and I was eager to like move through space and do things that were very like big and grand. And, I for sure didn't have any maturity to like quiet down or turn inwards. And so I went through like a big part of my life. If people would mention yoga, I'd be like, oh, I don't like yoga. That's not for me. So I tried some here and there. And then finally, when I graduated college, I had a good friend who worked at a yoga studio at the desk. And she was also a dancer and someone who I respected a lot. And she did yoga religiously. Like every morning she would go, sometimes she would go again in the afternoons. And I actually had like a very big hip injury after college. So I didn't dance for almost a year. And it took like another year to kind of recover from it, to feel strong enough to dance again. So I was looking for other ways I could move. And so I went to visit her one day when she was working the desk at the yoga studio. And I was like, oh, it seems nice here. Like, let me give it a try. And so probably at that point would have been like 2013 or something like that. And maybe even a little bit later. And, they had one of these like unlimited 2-week specials. And this is what gets you hooked, I swear, because you're like, oh, I got to get my money's worth. Let me do like 2 or 3 times. And then I fell completely in love with it. And I think it's just a matter of like coming to something at the right time in your life and when things make sense for you. And yeah, that was it. There's like no turning back from then.
And you were a ballet dancer or different types of dancer?
Different types. So when I first started, when I was really young, I did all the like ballet, tap, jazz, etc. And then in high school, I went to a school that was concentrated on ballet. So it was a high school specifically for ballet dancers. And it was in Philadelphia where I grew up. So I was lucky I could still like be around my family, but people came from all over the world and they would stay there and train in ballet. And then when I went to college, I went to Fordham University here in New York, which has a program with the Alvin Ailey Dance Company, which is a modern dance company. And so then I did a ton of modern dancing. And then that led me to contemporary dance, which maybe it sounds the same, modern and contemporary, but contemporary, you can let go a little bit of like the technique and the rules, and it's a little bit more, I would say, artistic. That might be controversial, but I felt I could express myself more as an artist through contemporary dance. So that's mainly how I performed after college, was contemporary dance.
And at the time, was your dream to become a professional dancer and kind of pursue that career path?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, since I was young, I think I was like 7 and I gave my mom a presentation about why I needed an agent so that I could be like dancing professionally. Yeah, I've wanted to do that.
I also interviewed another yoga teacher named Britt, and she's also a full-time yoga teacher in New York. I think she lives in Brooklyn, but she was also a previous dancer before she became a yoga teacher. And I feel like I see that a lot. A lot of yoga teachers do come from dance background, maybe sometimes gymnastic. In LA, is it ex-actors and actresses who become yoga teachers as well? So I know you said you had a hip injury. Was that related to dancing? How you got injured?
Yeah, I think completely like overuse. It was something that like the MRI showed a labral tear in my hip, but I don't know, to be honest, if that's what was causing my pain. I think it was a lot of like over gripping and maybe even just my muscles trying to like protect around this labral tear, which is like the tear in the cartilage of the hip joint. But yeah, it's interesting because I see this a lot too, where it's like dancers, and you're right, like former movers or maybe even performers kind of gravitate towards yoga. And I actually teach yoga to dancers now, which is like one of my big passions. And again, so funny because as a dancer, I was like not interested in yoga at all. There's something to be said for us using our bodies, and we know how to use them. So there's a vehicle of like, we're used to using them to express outwards. And then since we know how to connect to our bodies, once we can kind of like flip the switch and use it to connect inwards, I don't know, there's something profound that happens, that there's this vehicle that was always there that meant something to us, but now we can use it in a different way that maybe we find ourselves a little bit more, we get to have agency over our bodies in maybe a way we don't always get in the dance world. And we can let go of a lot of perfectionism and things like that. So yeah, it kind of becomes this like pathway in, whereas our whole lives, it's like been a pathway out, I think.
That's so interesting. And when did you first realize that you want to become a teacher, yoga teacher?
Like 2 weeks after taking yoga classes. It was pretty immediate. And it's so funny because in the dance world, it's a very carved out path that you have a dance career and then you teach dance. And maybe that's not it for everybody, but it's very, very common. And I always said to people, like, I have zero interest in teaching dance. That's not going to be what I'll do. I'll have to find something else. And I did teach dance a little bit, especially for kids, but it was never a big interest of mine. And then once I found yoga and it got me, I was like, I have to share this. I wanted to do it right away.
And what was the style of yoga that you started practicing that got you really hooked?
It was vinyasa yoga. Yeah, and which I think a lot of dancers gravitate to because it's like the movement and the flow of everything. And then, of course, as time goes on, or at least for me, as time went on, I was able to like slow down more and more and appreciate like the more subtle practices. But yeah, it was vinyasa at the time.
Nice. And how was your 200-hour teacher training? Did you do it at the studio that you were kind of going regularly?
Yes. So this studio was called Yoga Vida, and unfortunately it doesn't exist anymore. It shut down during COVID. But yeah, I did my 200-hour there in the beginning of 2017. So it was an in-person format. It was maybe over 3 months, and we were there on the weekends. So we would do Friday evenings and then Saturday and Sundays all day. And it was just incredible. I loved every minute of it. I would do it again and again if I could. We had a big group. It was like 50 of us, which is kind of crazy to think about. But somehow, like, I never felt, at least for myself, I never felt like anyone got lost in the group. I felt like we all got to like see each other. Everyone was talking to each other and supporting each other. And we had mentors who kind of like mentored small groups of us. So we had someone we could like go to if we needed to. And they just actually, even though it was a vinyasa studio, they presented such a variety of different yoga lineages and different kind of perspectives of yoga. So, for example, like most of our alignment was taught by an Iyengar teacher. And We had like Ashtanga teachers come in and teach us about that perspective. We had restorative yoga and a little bit of prenatal thrown in there. So, and we did a ton of yoga philosophy. We had a great anatomy teacher. So it just felt like a very well-rounded program. And I think that's so special because yoga does hold so many things in it. And that's why I think so many different people can gravitate towards it. It's like, I don't know, I picture like, you know, when a kid draws a sun and there's a circle in the middle and there's these like lines going out. I picture like all these different pathways in. If the circle is yoga and the lines are the different pathways, like people can kind of find it for what they need it for. And I think that's very special about it. So it also, I think, gave me a perspective of you can meet many people through this practice where they are and like with where they want to go too.
Yeah, that's so beautiful, your analogy of the sun and how there's different paths to yoga. It's so true. Like I feel like there's a specialty that so many specialties and like interest it can take you in the whole realm of your yoga. There's so many different paths, and I love that about yoga as well.
Also like hold you through so many different parts of your life too. You know, if you have the part where you're like, okay, I need to do vigorous asana, then it's there. But maybe there's a part of your life where you're like, I need to slow down or I can't move my body as much. But then you have pranayama and you have meditation practices, and it can just kind of be this like expansive thing that holds you in many different ways.
Yeah, so true. And after your 200 hours, well, first of all, your 200 hours sounds really cool. It sounds like it was very well balanced. That's not what I hear all the time from a lot of people's 200-hour experience. So it sounds like it was a great one. And after your 200-hour, did you start teaching right away?
Yeah, so I did, I think like the next 2 weekends after I had graduated, you know, you get the bug. You're just so excited to start learning and to keep learning. So I did 2 other weekend trainings, and one was trauma informed, or I think it was called trauma sensitivity. And then one was the fundamentals of Iyengar with an amazing teacher named Nikki Costello, who I just love so much to this day. And then I did at that studio at Yoga Vida, they had a mentorship program. So I started that the summer after I graduated, which would have been maybe like 2 months afterwards. And it was an incredible program. You had one of like the senior teachers at the studio as your mentor, and you would assist their classes over the course of the week. You taught community classes at the studio, usually once, sometimes twice a week, and those were donation based. So, you know, people can come, and somehow it makes you feel better as a teacher too. Like, okay, they're just donating something. They're not paying like $20 for class yet. You can kind of get your footing. So that was incredible. And then they had continuing education for us as part of that program. So we had more anatomy, more philosophy, a lot more about like adjustments and sequencing. And your mentor would kind of approve your sequences and then come to your class and give you feedback. And that was like a 5-month program or something. So it was long, and it was nice to be with other new teachers at the time too, doing that. And also at the same time, I started teaching at a dance studio. So I started teaching yoga to dancers, and it's so, I don't know why I felt this, but at the beginning I was kind of like, I don't want to teach dancers. And I think my thought was I wanted to teach like quote unquote normal people or regular people who maybe don't get to move that much. And then, of course, it was like just through my connections in New York. I used to work at the desk at this dance studio, and it just happened to be that their yoga teacher was like leaving, and they had an opening, and they had asked me to sub a couple of times. And then they were like, oh, we have this opening. Do you want to take it? And so, of course, I did. And then, yeah, fell in love with that group of dancers and teaching there.
And what was your job or your income before you started teaching yoga? Were you making money as a professional dancer?
Yes, but I wouldn't say that was my main source of income. It was very freelance and project based and very inconsistent. So I always had another job, usually connected to the arts. So it would be either some type of like arts administrative position. Like I did some administration for a dance company, another dance studio, and I used to manage a dance studio, which is where I ended up teaching and still teach to this day. So I always had something related, but that was one of my motivations too of getting this like teaching certificate was I kind of saw after a while, okay, I'm always going to need to have something else. And if I'm going to have something else, I want it to be something that I care about and that I'm really passionate about, and not just like, oh, I'm just doing this to like make some money.
And once you start teaching yoga, what was your transition like to be doing other things and dancing and other dance related job and also teaching yoga to slowly becoming a full-time yoga teacher? Was that a conscious decisions that you were making, or did it kind of naturally happen?
It more naturally happened. In the beginning, it was so nice. And I mean, I would still say that because I still do a couple projects a year dance-wise that maybe I'll need to take some time off for. But, you know, I was doing more when I first started teaching. And I was teaching at this like major studio. I mean, Yoga Vida had 4 locations in New York and just like classes all day, every day. It was probably 100 teachers on the list. So it was very easy to pick up sub opportunities when I was first teaching and when I was like first hired by the studio. I know you've like heard this a lot on your podcast, but you know, I just took like every sub opportunity. I was checking my phone like a maniac because I'd be like, did anyone request a sub? I have to get it. I have to take it. But then it was also so easy to get my classes covered if I had something I needed to cover them for. So they kind of worked in a nice balance with each other that, okay, I could like dance when I had the opportunity to, but then I had something else that I loved doing when there weren't dance projects happening and there weren't performances or anything. And then, I mean, over time, first of all, it was like I got a little bit older, and I mean, already at like 22 or 21, I had like a major hip injury. So it just kind of indicates like how fast your body can break down as a dancer. It doesn't have to be that way, but for me, it was. And then like COVID happened, you know? And man, I can't believe it's already been 4 years. But it also, these two things kind of coincided with each other where there was like nothing happening in the dance world, at least for me. And I was like getting a little older, and it just became like, I only want to do the things that I care about. And so now dance wise, I only do the projects that are like really mean a lot to me. And I don't really like go out for auditions. I don't submit myself for anything. It's just like, yeah, it's taken a turn, but it kind of happened naturally that it's like, okay, I really feel so committed and so happy to be teaching. And the dance is kind of I get to like enjoy it a little bit more then. It's like I don't have to try to make it a job. I can just enjoy doing it and loving it for what it is now.
Yeah. So before the pandemic hit, you weren't full-time yoga teacher yet, or were you?
I was.
Okay.
Yeah. I was teaching about at least like 10 group classes a week. And then I'm trying to think, I had some on and off privates, nothing that like really stuck for a long time. And yeah, like picking up sub opportunities and stuff. So it was like my main thing, but I was just able to like take time off if I needed to.
Yeah. And how is it like in New York to be a full-time yoga teacher? Like, do you have to teach so many group classes and you have to teach so many private? Like, how were you able to make it during that time before the pandemic?
I mean, it's a ton of running around. It's a lot of, I mean, there is a gift of like, okay, I get to be in all these different neighborhoods, and maybe I wouldn't normally go to like Upper West Side, Upper East Side, Brooklyn, all of that. But it's a ton of running around, a lot of time on the subway. And then actually I'd be curious if it's the same in LA too, where it's not always so easy to like go home in between. So sometimes, and I feel like especially then I lived in Queens, which is like not central, and I didn't teach in Queens at all. So I always had these pockets of time where I was like, okay, what park can I go sit in? What studio can I sit in for 3 hours? Do I need to go like buy a coffee somewhere so I can kill time? So it was all these like these moments of like, okay, I gotta like find something to do with myself between classes.
No, I think that's very similar to LA as well. And I think the difference is, I think in LA, people are driving all day long, from studio to studio and different part of LA to different part of LA, or studio to private clients. And sometimes you have to sit in traffic for a long time, or sometimes, okay, I have this awkward 1 hour or an hour and a half to kill between my next class to this class. So I think it's definitely similar in that case.
Used to have my weekends used to be really busy pre-COVID. I would teach like 2 classes Saturday mornings, and then I would have like a 4 hour break, maybe even a 5 hour break, and then a class in the evening. And then I did like basically the same thing on Sunday again. And so I would just like go and take a nap if there was an empty studio, or on the couch at the studio, or I would like go find a class to take or take a dance class in between. And it was like, I just remember carrying so many bags around all the time because it was like I got to change clothes basically after every class because I'm sweating so much. And I just felt like a bag lady running around all the time.
Yeah. Oh my God, I can relate, because in LA, most people own a car, but I choose not to own a car. So
Okay.
I have a lot of bags that I have to carry around, because if you have a car, you can like store your stuff in the car, right?
Yes,
Your extra bags, extra outfit, or like extra
sounds like a
video
dream.
props. Yeah, but for me, in the beginning I was riding my bicycle around to different locations, and now I own a scooter, almost like a
Cool.
Vespa, that I ride around to go to work. But we don't have a lot. I don't have a lot of storage space. So I have to be carrying a lot of stuff with me. So I can totally relate. And
Oh.
do you own a car? It's normal not to own a car in New York City, right?
No, to be very honest with you, Reika, I don't even have a driver's license because I moved here when I was 17 and I have never needed one.
Yeah, I think that's amazing that, you don't have to drive. I'm hoping one day LA will become like that, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's nice to have the public transportation. I mean, I do one day want to get my driver's license because I think it's important. But at least I can use the commute time for something else. Like I can answer emails on the train, or I can sometimes I'll review my class plans, or I'll kind of like play with my playlists a little bit. So at least I can use the time in between to do something. But yeah, I mean, you realize when you go out of New York, like how much energy commuting takes.
Yeah. And pandemic happened. What happened in the pandemic for you? What was your life as a full-time yoga teacher before, and what happened during, and how did it shift maybe after when things opened back up?
Yeah. So I would say, I'm trying to think exactly. I guess by the time the pandemic hit, I had been teaching full time for like 2 years-ish. But the studio where I was teaching, I mean, I had like great classes there. I had such consistent students, but there were also still like so many teachers I looked up to. There were a lot of senior teachers who I felt like I just admired so much. And then, yeah, the pandemic hit. And first we went online. So first that studio went online. And I also did then some of my own classes online. So a lot of it, did you ever do this, like the Instagram live classes during COVID? They became such a sensation.
Yeah, it did, but I actually never taught on Instagram Live, but I know many teachers in studio did.
Yeah. So that was like the very first thing the studio I taught for did was like, okay, it was like the first week of lockdown. I mean, people pivoted so quickly. And then they joined an online platform. And that studio was very lucky because they got some kind of like small business protection funding where kind of like their main roster of teachers who had full-time jobs there could continue teaching that much and getting like the same income more or less. So that was amazing. And that lasted, I'm trying to think even how long, 6 months or something. And then at the same time, I was teaching online for the dance studio. I taught one class a week online. And then I ran a couple of my own classes. So I think at first I did them on Instagram Live, and it was donation based. So if people couldn't pay, it was totally fine. I like wanted people needed yoga so much during that time and connection. And then later I moved them to Zoom. And what was really kind of touching about that time was it felt like students really rallied around their teachers. And, I felt so connected to like this one specific studio. And usually, or at least at that time, it felt like people really like also connected to a studio. And they were like, okay, I go to this studio and whoever's teaching at 4 p.m., I just take their class every day. And it really felt during that time like people made an effort to be like, oh, you are my teacher, so I'm going to support you as my teacher. And whether that's on this online platform or whether it's on your Zoom classes, like I am choosing to take from you, which was very beautiful and so touching and surprising. And it also made it so that it felt more like my career was in my own hands and less in like, okay, whatever the studio gives me, I get to do. But like, oh no, I'm in charge of how much I teach and how that's going to look like. So that was a big change for me. And then I think it was exactly 1 year that I didn't teach in a studio in person at all. It was almost like 1 year to the day that then I actually got hired by a different studio in New York when things were allowed to open again. And I came back and it's so wild to think about. They had this like clear curtain around the teachers. And I think only like 6 people were allowed in the room, and those people had to practice with masks on. But obviously like teachers can't really teach with masks on because also it was online at the same time. So we were wearing like a mic. And there was a camera in front of us and then like a curtain and then people on the other side of the curtain. I like can't even believe we did that when I think about it. So then it was little by little, like studios were trying to come back and I taught at some studios and like they didn't all survive. So I would kind of like have a little bit of time I was teaching and then that studio like wouldn't be able to stay open. And then there would be a new one and I would start like teaching there and then it wasn't able to stay open. And it felt like it took, I'm trying to think, probably like 2 years to feel like, okay, there's some stable ground again. I feel like my job is a little more secure again. And it a little bit felt like being a new teacher again, where it was this thing of like any opportunity that you get, you say yes to it. It doesn't matter what time of day. It doesn't matter how far it is. You're just like, okay, there's an opportunity to teach and I'm ready to teach. So I'm just going to take it. And then again, just like running around. And now it's kind of like I'm back to the fullness of it all. And like, oh yeah, maybe I need to like streamline again. And it feels like it almost repeated itself, but with a different feeling behind it.
Now that you started talking about how we taught during the pandemic, it brought back a lot of memories of we had to teach with our mask on for quite a long time. I even had like I chose to wear face shield for a little bit before without not the mask because it was just like so hard to teach with mask on. And also if I'm teaching heated, sweaty class, hot yoga, it was just like, I can't imagine I did that for so long.
No.
But it's almost surreal to remember back to that time.
Like a fever dream.
Yeah, it does. It does feel like that. I know you said you were teaching online for yourself for a little bit during the pandemic, and you mentioned that you felt like the power, it was back to the teachers. What happened to your online classes? Did you continue to teach or did you kind of stop teaching, or was students, once studio opened, they preferred to be in person?
For a while, I kept doing it. So even as I was transitioning back into in-person teaching, I was still running usually twice a week, these Zoom classes. And, there was such kind of like a divide during that time too, or I don't know if I even want to call it a divide, but it felt like kind of a spectrum of some people were ready to go back, some people weren't. And it really like took time and kind of waves of, okay, now some people are ready, now a little bit more are ready, now some are more comfortable. And, it's interesting because there are some people who took my online classes that now I see them all the time in person. And there are some people who like I haven't talked to since I stopped running the online classes. Like people either moved out of New York or they just never got into the habit of going in person again. You know, I don't know if you feel this in LA, but in New York, it was like a big shift for a long time that it felt like people just weren't coming back to studios as much. And even when they were, I mean, it used to be kind of like, for example, evening classes, people would go more to studios near where they were working. So they would leave work, they bring a change of clothes, and maybe they go like 3 blocks away from their office and go to yoga. And now I get the feeling it's more that people go in their neighborhoods because so many people are still working online or they only go into the office like twice a week or something. So whenever I see someone come into the studio now and they come in like their suit or their work clothes and they change. It feels very nostalgic for pre-COVID. Like, oh, you came after work and this is near your office. And there's something very like sweet about it now that was so common before.
Yeah, but eventually kind of the online classes kind of stopped.
Yes, so I stopped running my own Zoom classes just because I was seeing attendance go down and my schedule was picking up in person.
Mhm.
I still teach for a studio that has an online platform, and I usually record a few classes a month for them. So for a while, I was recording once a week, and now it's usually like 2 or 3 classes a week that I'll record, or excuse me, 2 or 3 classes a month that I'll record for them. And I also still teach 2 corporate classes over Zoom a week.
Oh, nice. Was that the corporate class? Did you have that job class before the pandemic and kind of switched to online during the pandemic, or did you find that during the pandemic?
Neither. So I've been doing it for a year. But those classes did exist in person and then they switched to online during COVID. And now they're actually talking about bringing them back in person after 4 years. But I got that job through another teacher who I knew at this previous studio, Yoga Vida, and then who started coming to take my classes at a new studio where I was teaching. And she was looking for someone to take on some of these corporate classes. So she asked me to do it. So that's been a year I've been doing that now.
Oh, nice. And I'm curious, in New York, is it more common to get paid per class, like a set rate, or is it per head? What's the pay structure look like in New York typically?
Yeah, usually it's per class that you just have a set rate for class. I know some studios do it a little bit differently. I think oftentimes if they do something per head, it will be like a little bonus per head. So let's say like class, if it's 50% full, you get paid X amount, but for every head over 50% full, you'll get an extra couple dollars or something. In the dance world, it's usually more per head for open classes. So at the dance studio where I teach, I do get paid per head, but otherwise for the yoga studios, it's a class rate, a set rate.
Yeah, I think that's similar in LA. I think I don't know how it is in New York, but I think it used to be in LA and maybe used to be in California. It was more common to be per head or maybe have like a base pay per class, but you make additional per head. I think that's how it used to be more common, but now in my experience, it's usually set rate per class.
Yeah, and I kind of prefer that because then you know what to expect. And
Mhm.
when you're teaching open classes, there's so many factors that you don't even consider that will really affect attendance. Like if it's super nice outside, I'll expect that not as many people are going to be in a yoga class. They're going to want to like go outside and enjoy their lunch out there or something.
Mhm.
So I like when I can expect what to make. And then yeah, maybe if you're having high attendance, then that's going to secure a higher class rate for you in the future.
Yeah. And what does your typical week of teaching look like? Sharing how many of that classes is group versus private versus corporate or any other form of teachings that you do?
Yeah, so my week is busy these days. I was counting earlier. So I have 9 public group classes a week. 8 are at a heated vinyasa studio, and they have 3 locations. So, excuse me, they have 4 locations, but I teach at 3 of them. And then the 9th one is with the dance studio where I teach. So it's an open class, but I also have dancers who are part of like a pre-professional program. So I see mostly the same group of people every week there, but other people can drop into the class. And then I teach usually about 4 private classes a week, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less, depending on if people are away or if somebody needs a sub for a private or someone wants to do a one-off or something. And then usually I teach 2 to 3 corporate classes a week. So like I mentioned, I have 2 on Zoom every week, and then usually 1 in person, where I go into the office and I teach for them. And also right now I'm running a mentorship program, or I'm co-running a mentorship program for newer teachers. So we meet all together once a month, but we're like paired specifically with these newer teachers. So I am specifically mentoring one of them. So usually we have a meeting every week and we talk about how her teaching is going and her sequencing. And then there's another studio that I teach for sometimes on the weekends. And that's the same one that I record online classes for too. So it's a lot of like different things going on.
Yeah. And so that's about 15 classes a week, if I did my math.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. To be honest, I don't always add it up because it feels very overwhelming, but that sounds about right. And then there's sometimes where if I've like picked up something extra, it's been like 20 a week, which is too many.
Yeah. Yeah, 20 is a good amount. How does this schedule feel for you? Do you feel like it's a little too much? Does it feel just right? How does it feel? Do you feel like you're overworking? Do you have a day off?
Right now, in theory, I have Saturdays off. But with this mentorship program, oftentimes we meet on Saturdays. So that's once a month. And then sometimes I teach for that studio on Saturdays. I have only 1 class on Sundays. So usually I teach, and it's a private class, and it's easy to get to. But I would like it if I could have 2 days off that I know are guaranteed completely off, like in a row would be amazing. So right now I would say, yeah, I feel like my schedule's been a little too overwhelmed. And I think part of that has been this, like I said, this mentality after COVID of like picking up everything that I can and like saying yes to everything, because there was this time where, my teaching was so unsure. It was so uncertain that these classes would last and if studios were even going to stay open. And then you and I, Reika, just finished this like major teacher training program too. So that's also been just such a huge chunk of time. And I mean, it's been so inspiring, but definitely my schedule has been like a little bit too full. And I'm definitely thinking about, okay, how can I streamline things? So that it doesn't feel overwhelming and that I know I have some guaranteed time off. And, you want to stay like inspired and present. And that's so important to me for my students. So it's definitely on my mind of like, okay, what do I want it to look like going forward?
I can relate. I can totally relate. I think I teach when I'm in LA, I teach similar amount of classes as you, and maybe probably similar ratio of, group classes versus private or corporate. Although I don't teach that many heated classes anymore. I only teach once a week heated. But heated can be very draining. It can be tiring on your body to teach quite a bit.
Yeah, you see me chugging water over here.
Yeah.
But is it so like in LA that people are very into heated yoga? Here it's such a sensation. It's like very hard to find vinyasa studios that aren't heated.
Yes, it's so popular. And I think I wouldn't say you have to have a heated class, but it almost feels like you have to have a heated class in your studio for the studio to be able to survive, to have that. Like it's the reason why people want to sign up for a studio, I think, is a heated class, which is, yeah, I think, I have mixed feelings about, but if that can be a gateway for people to come in and start really getting interested in yoga, I think that's great. Somehow I was able to not get rid of, but somehow my schedule turned out in the last year or two to kind of have only one heated and rest is a room, room temperature classes. I think it's rare. I think because most studios offer heated. So yeah, but I'm kind of grateful for that natural shift that occurred. And I want to know, if necessary, could you fully support yourself financially through full-time yoga teaching career?
Yes.
So amazing, because that's like living in LA or New York is such an expensive place to live. One of the most expensive places to live in this country. So I think it says a lot that it's possible. I can do it, you can do it. And, I hope listeners can know that as well.
Yeah. And I don't know how it is in LA with like how much is to be expected to get paid. But I think also in these bigger cities, you can expect, a larger class rate. You can ask for more as a private teacher that I wouldn't be able to ask if I live somewhere probably like middle of the country or in a suburb somewhere or something like that. So it kind of goes twofold. I will say it's not like, I'm married, so I also have a 2-income household. But I can like fully support myself. But at the same time, like if it was just me, it's not like a lavish life that I'm living either. It's not like I'm living in a penthouse supporting myself with a New York yoga teacher salary.
No, totally. Same with LA.
Yes, I think it's just important to be said that it's like, yes, I can support myself, but it's a trade-off. It's going to be a different quality of life than maybe you would have in a different profession.
Yeah, definitely. I can relate. Same thing. I can say that I can support myself, but I always had somebody to share my rent with. Like I always lived in a place with the roommates or housemates or a partner. So definitely I can continue to support myself even if I didn't have my partner, but I would probably be sharing apartment with somebody else,
Yes, exactly. Before I moved in with my now husband, I lived in an apartment with 2 roommates. So it was a 3-bedroom apartment. And it was my first apartment out of college. And I lived there for 10 years because it was rent stabilized. So I was so lucky because they could only raise the rent, I think like $50 a year to be split between 3 people. So it was something crazy, like the rent between my first year and my last year, 10 years later, it was only like, I don't know, $150 difference or something. So that like was just such a game changer for my life that I could have like a very low rent for New York and that I knew it wasn't going to go up. Surprisingly, that made a huge difference.
Yeah, totally.
Like I gotta raise my kids here, I gotta raise my grandkids here, like I'm never gonna leave. Obviously I did, but yeah, I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah. When I first started teaching, I rented a tiny room that was $475 a month.
Wow.
So I was able to do it. I was a new teacher, so I was trying to pick up as much as possible and work front desk, clean the studio. But it was possible because I had such a cheap rent. I was riding my bicycles around. I didn't have car payments and, so it's definitely possible, but maybe it's not for everyone. I think a lot of us come into wanting to become a full-time yoga teacher because we love it and not so much because we want to become rich.
Yes, 100%. And it's so funny too, now that I think about it, I started teaching as also a dancer. And for me, it felt like the yoga teaching was the stable income. And that was like, the more guaranteed stable life. And it's so funny to think about that now, like, not exactly. It's still pretty hard and you still have to work for it. And yeah, now I know better, but I'm very happy to be doing it.
Yeah. What do you think is your teaching style? What do you think your teaching makes it different from other teachers? And if you have specialties that you think you have, I would like to know.
This always feels like a very hard question for me. I think my teaching is quite adaptable. I think that's something, yeah, I can say I think my teaching is quite adaptable. I can And I enjoy like meeting many different people, having a variety of students. Like my private clients are very different from each other, and they're very different from my group classes. And that's very different from the dancers that I teach. I tell new teachers that I think a lot of what makes you a good teacher is also like what makes you a good person. That, of course we want to like be able to cue with clarity, and we want to have good sequencing and be thoughtful and safe. But, I think I'm also like a compassionate person, and that makes me a compassionate teacher. And so I really try to like meet people where they are and make them feel comfortable and seen and safe in a class. And I enjoy connecting with people. So I think that works really well. We just finished this Threes Physiyoga program. So I also consider myself like very fascinated by the body. And I'm always trying to learn more about anatomy and biomechanics, and to use that to help keep people feeling good in their bodies. So I would say, like, if you were to come to an open vinyasa class of mine, hopefully you would feel that I like know something about the body. And I also, coming from a dance background, believe in like the joy of movement. So I do like to include some feelings of like, I have like a resistance to this word flow for some reason. I think it's used in a lot of different ways, but I do think you would feel like, oh yeah, I'm moving. I get to move back and forth. I get to feel like the air on my skin and my body moving through space. But that it's not, was it Olga on your podcast who said something so insightful that was like, creative doesn't mean random? And I thought that was so spot on, because I think a lot of people will say something to me like, oh, you're teaching so creative. I never like tried that thing before. And it's not that I'm just trying like random things and being like, oh, I've never seen this pose go into this pose, but I like drawing from different modalities. I like novelty for people to like pay attention and experience something new in their bodies. So there's like a good healthy mix of things, and it changes. I mean, some of my private clients, it's like we do almost all restorative, or we do a lot of breathing and meditation and things like that. So it's really adaptable. But that makes it so fun too, because every day feels very different.
Yeah. So beautiful. You explaining your class made me want to take your class.
Please
So
come take my class.
I would love to. Another question I have is, how did you find your private clients?
Yeah. So I think all of my private clients have either been through word of mouth or that I met in a group class. So there's one private client that I met at Yoga Vida, where I used to teach pre-COVID. And during COVID, she wanted to keep doing yoga. And so she hired me as a private teacher. And now I've been working with her for several years. Another private client I got through a yoga teacher friend of mine. Actually, I got it through my yoga mentor, who was my mentor in this mentorship program I told you. And it's actually it's a woman, and oftentimes I teach her family members who are in the Hasidic community in Brooklyn. And so they're, at least my understanding and what their situation is that the women need to be taught by women and the men need to be taught by men. So my mentor is male, and he teaches the husband, and his wife was looking for a teacher who she could go to. So then he recommended me, and I've been teaching her and her daughters for almost 3 years now. And then yeah, a couple of others would just come from like group classes, and sometimes they'll do one-offs, or I'll see them a couple times a week, or recommendations from other yoga teachers.
Yeah, I feel like that's what I hear the most is word of mouth from group classes that you teach. So yeah, definitely. Do you feel like Three's physio yoga training that we just completed have helped you with your private yoga teachings?
So much. I like cannot emphasize how much it's helped. Like one of my private clients was in a lot of pain in her hip and her back. And I would say I had like knowledge of the body before, but the way that like the framework of our training and how to really like work with people in a skillful way who are experiencing pain was just so helpful. And it's been amazing to see her progress. Like I mean, knock wood, but she is like pain-free now. And she's a mother and she's a grandmother. And what's important to her is she can like run around with her grandkids and she can walk in Brooklyn with her family for miles and not be in pain. And she was just telling me she was at the beach with her family this week and she was able to like sit on the sand. And she was like, I wouldn't have been able to do that a year ago. So that's been incredible. And the other piece of it, like something I appreciated so much about this training is that you really look at people as whole people and not just bodies, which I didn't expect from a program that was so focused on anatomy and biomechanics and things like that. But you learn so much about the nervous system and how much even just breathing deeply can really affect like people's experience of pain and anxiety even. And of course, we have this tool as yoga teachers, but when you really learn the power of it and you can feel comfortable leaning into it, I think that's also becomes like such a helpful tool and such an important gift that you can give to your students. So one of my private clients experiences a ton of anxiety. And so she really turns to yoga to help with anxiety. And even just being able to lean into some of the breathing practices and down regulation and things like that, knowing that that is really having like a physiological effect is so powerful.
Yeah, so true. Definitely that training, the physio yoga training, had a huge impact on my teaching as well. I'm excited that we still have the resources and we can still continue to review the content even after we graduate, because those resources I feel like are gold. I feel like I can keep going back.
Me too. I want to like go through all of it 7 more times, I think.
Yeah, definitely. So what aspects of being a full-time yoga teacher do you love the most, and what do you find most challenging?
I love the most the people that I get to work with. Like I said, I mean, I teach such a variety of students and a variety of different class types and things. And it's just such a gift to get to interact with so many people. I always say it's interesting because, if you meet someone at like a dinner party or something, one of the first things you ask them is like, what do you do for work? And that's like one of the first things you learn about them. And I swear, unless it's like a private client of mine, sometimes I have no idea what people do until like 3 years later. And I'll be like, I had no idea you were a chef or, whatever. But you get to see people in such a different way. And I feel like I get to know them and see them, how they relate to themselves and how they relate to their practices. So it's just like a very beautiful way of getting to relate to people that I mean, I plan to do it forever. I love it so much. And I love getting to meet people where they are and help them feel better in their bodies and their minds and in their lives. And so that's like the biggest plus for me is just all these people that I get to work with. It feels so like sad to say something challenging after that because I just love it so much. But I mean, what's beautiful is also what's hard is that it's different every day. And it's very hard to have, there's no sense of like a consistent schedule day to day, at least, even if it's consistent week to week. Like I have some mornings I teach at 7:30 in the morning. So I have to be up at 5:30 in the morning. And then I have other days that I teach till like 8 or 9 p.m. And so I don't even get home till 10 p.m. So there's no sense of like consistent sleep or even like eating your meals at the same time. So that can be really challenging. And I think her name was Ashley on your podcast was mentioning too about, like sick days. And like we don't have them. I don't have any sick days. And it's ironic in a way that we're in the not healthcare, I shouldn't say that, but that we're in the wellness industry and we're helping people to take care of their well-beings. And we are also like could very easily spread something when we see so many people, and yet we don't have any like paid sick time. And I think that's very unfortunate. So those are some of the challenges, I would say, is it's like, and also just, I mean, the commuting is a big challenge.
The sick day thing, and even like insurance, like we don't get insurance coverage from any of the places we work at. I think they're like, I heard a few studios who actually do employ teachers as a full-time if they teach more than like 17 classes a week for that specific studio. And then there are benefits that they can get. But most of the time, I feel like most of us, we're independent contractors. We don't have insurance coverage. We don't have sick days. But then like on the flip side of that, it's similar to kind of what you said earlier. It's also great that we have the freedom to be like, hey, I'm going to take six weeks off and go live in Italy for a while. Or for me, I'm like, I'm taking 4 months off. I'm going to Peru. And although when we're not working, we're not making any money.
Yeah.
we still have the freedom to be able to do that. I think that's kind of the flip side to that. Although I feel like we should have insurance and we should have coverage and we should have sick days.
Yes to all of that. And I think then it's so, because I'm also someone like you who loves to travel. And I mean, we were talking before we started recording, but I'm about to be away from New York for 6 weeks and traveling. And part of that time I'm running a yoga retreat. So I am working and I have a dance residency and things, but there is this, there is this ability to kind of, I mean, we're all such passionate people because we wouldn't be doing it if we weren't. So it's nice that there is some freedom to like follow other passions in our lives and feed ourselves in that way. And so when I'm in New York, I try to be as consistent as possible. Like unless I'm away or I'm like very sick, I never sub out my classes. Like I really honor those commitments so that I have the ability and kind of like the credit to my name that I can like go away and then come back.
No, I think that's so true. I think consistency is so important as a yoga teacher to try to be consistent as much as possible so they can really rely on you, students or studio or your corporate client. If they know you're consistent, you always do show up, then I feel like I'm fine if I tell them, hey, I'm leaving for 2 weeks. I'll be back in 2 weeks. Because they know that, when I'm here, I am very consistent. But I want to know about your retreat. So is this an independent retreat that you're running on your own or with partner, or is this through a studio you work at? Tell me about your retreat.
Yeah, so I told you a little bit about this online platform that also has a little bit of in-person classes now. It's called House of Flow. That's also what I'm running the mentorship program through. And I work with a teacher there named Erica Chen, who's an incredible teacher. And I know her through Yoga Vida, where I used to teach. She was actually like one of the teacher trainers in my teacher training 200-hour program. So this is the third retreat we've run together. And we're going to be in Tuscany for a week. And it's very exciting. We have 18 students coming with us, and that's sold out. And it sold out like very far ahead of time. I don't know about you, but I'm not someone who plans like a ton in advance, but it was like November. Most of the spots were full, which was really cool and, very fun to see. So yeah, we're going to be in like the Tuscan countryside, and there's a place called Ebbio there. And they have a little retreat center. And so they've done yoga retreats before, and I think they maybe do other types of retreats. But it's, I think, like a 12th century home or something like that. And it's family owned, which is really nice. And it's just been in their family for centuries. And they have a little farm there. So they do the cooking for us, and they use like vegetables from their farm. And yeah, this is my second international retreat. I did one also with Erica through House of Flow in Nicaragua last year. And we also worked with the retreat center. And what I find is really nice about that is that they can kind of help you plan everything that you want to do in that country. So, like if our group wants to go horseback riding, I don't know horses in Italy to like bring about for us to ride, or where I would even look into that. So it's kind of like we get to manage the people and we get to decide on the schedule. And of course, we run the yoga, but then they can help us with the food and with the activities and everything like that. So that's really helpful.
Sounds amazing. That Italy location with, you said, family owned. It's very old, and it's like, it's like almost like a farm to table.
Yeah.
Sounds amazing. And is this retreat something like you have to organize everything from the scratch, and you have to also do a lot of promotion to try to get people in, or is that kind of done by the studio?
It's a little bit of both. The studio is very like mom and pop small business. So this other teacher, Erica, who I'm co-hosting with, she's the owner along with her husband of House of Flow. And it's like a very grassroots effort. So I feel as a teacher, like I'm going to do everything I can to like help organize and help, like I send out a ton of emails and, yeah, we did a lot of promotion, but at the same time, we were lucky that this retreat kind of like sold itself because it was in such a beautiful place. Of course, there's a lot of announcements and posting that has to happen, but it didn't feel like a couple times in the past with retreats, it felt like you really have to like make an effort and you're really trying to bring people in, and there's almost like a struggle to finding people to come with you. And here it felt so much easier. So I was very happy for that.
That's beautiful. Well, I'm very excited for your retreat. I'll be following you on Instagram to see some photos and videos.
Thank you. I'm so excited for it.
Yeah.
And it's nice to, especially when I teach so many open classes, it's really such a gift to have like one group of students for 1 week that we get to do yoga twice a day together over 7 days. And yeah, like really help people hopefully progress in their practice and kind of take some more nuance and in-depth practices together. I'm excited for that.
Yeah, that's so true about having a consistent student for a week straight, twice a day. You really get to know their practice and you can see their improvement as well. So that's such a beautiful thing to be able to witness as a yoga teacher. A couple more questions before we wrap up. What are some mistakes you made along the way in your full-time yoga teaching career that you learned from, or you want to kind of share it with the listener, maybe somebody who's still new to teaching?
Yeah. I was thinking about how in the beginning, everything felt like such a big deal in a way. And in a way it is, because it's such like a privilege to get to teach, and it's such like an honor to get to hold that seat truly. But at the same time, like it's not a big deal if you mix up right and left, and it's not a big deal if you say foot when you mean hand. Like your students are going to be okay. Like they don't even realize that you said that. And I say that to say that like I didn't recognize, I think, in the beginning, what a gift it is just to give people the space to get to move their bodies and to like get out of their heads for an hour. And, so many people really live from like the head up their whole day, and they can like be very disembodied. And so it's such a gift, even if you don't have like a cool sequence or, fancy cues that nobody's ever heard before. Like, even if you're just teaching something very simple, there's so much power in it. And I didn't recognize that for a very long time, I think. As a new teacher, it was like, man, I didn't remember this cool thing I wanted to do. I was so hard on myself. And it was like I had a lot of anxiety too as a new teacher. I would like wake up in the middle of the night and be like, did I say the right thing? Did I forget warrior 3 on the left side? And, after some time, you're able to like settle more about those things, which is really nice. So that's a major one. Just, I think, like recognizing that it's such a gift, and like already you're doing enough. And like I said, you're doing enough just by being who you are and getting to lead yoga. The other thing, and this is like ongoing, is to think of yourself as a business person, that I really don't, I have such a resistance to it. I don't like thinking of myself as a business person. And I would venture to say that's very true for a lot of yoga teachers, because if you thought of yourself as a business person, you probably wouldn't be teaching yoga. You'd be like, I don't know, leading a company somewhere or something. But unfortunately, it's necessary. But it is fortunate too, because you get to like take the power into your own hands. Like we talked about a little bit, that yeah, like you are in charge of your rates and you're in charge of like your time. And oftentimes you need to like hold your ground or set your boundaries and decide what works for you. And that can be very difficult, like, especially in the beginning, especially if you haven't really held a position like that before in your career, to have to, yeah, like be in charge of yourself and decide what works for you and what doesn't. So even things as simple as like getting stuff in writing, there's a lot of like verbal agreements that happen. Even with like, for example, private clients, if you have a talk with them on the phone, like I've made the mistake of not then like following up in writing with what we agreed, and someone saying like, no, you said you were going to charge less than that. And I was like, absolutely, I know I did not. So yeah, being in charge of yourself as a business person too.
That's great advice for people, for sure. I feel like I had to go through so many mistakes to be able to have my, what is it, like agreement form that I have right now when I work with corporate or private, with like
Yeah.
cancellation policy and like all these little things, like I wouldn't have been able to realize until I made my own mistake, and you can learn about all of this online, and maybe I was slow to the game, but I feel like it took me a while to be able to really have that set and, okay, this is good agreement that I can use with my private and corporate clients. That that boundary setting is so important. It's so much easier to set that boundary in a very, very beginning.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's so much harder to like try to recreate your boundary later when you didn't set that in the starting point.
And people respect it,
Mhm.
and people also are used to it because people interact with other businesses. And sometimes it's funny because I think there are these blurry lines when you work in a profession that you are passionate about and people know that you're passionate about. It's similar in the dance world. Sometimes I see it in the yoga world. I'm sure it exists in other facets of life. But like when you're passionate about it, sometimes it's hard to be like, oh yeah, but also I deserve money for it. Or yeah, also my time is worth something and I do have to have this cancellation policy. But if you think of like any even like haircuts or massage appointments or doctor's appointments, in some cases, like there's cancellation policies. This is not going to be the first time people have heard of it. And you do have to hold that boundary. And I think people respect it when you do, but you're so spot on that it's to reset a boundary is like almost feels impossible. It's very difficult to do. So you just have to be uncomfortable up front with it and set it out, lay it out, and speak up for yourself when you need to. But it takes practice if you're not used to it.
Yeah, for sure. Last two questions for you. What does success mean to you as a full-time yoga teacher?
For me, success is the feeling of fulfillment. And I am very open to that feeling coming from different things and different paths over the course of time. But right now, I feel fulfilled when I get to work with a variety of people and in a variety of ways. And success to me also means having a path of growth in the moment and also ahead of me. So it feels successful when I'm learning. It feels successful when I discover something new in my teaching that didn't exist before, or that, yeah, something new comes out of me maybe, and that I can trust myself to teach in those ways, that I can be present and also be growing at the same time.
Thank you for that. And do you have any goals, or some people don't like to use the word goals? So like some kind of, where do you see yourself, your career heading? What kind of like path do you think you're heading or you want to be heading as a full-time yoga teacher?
I really want to find ways to keep working with people in depth. And so, as I've been emphasizing, I like the variety of my teaching a lot. For example, I would like to work with more private clients. I would like to be able to, hopefully help more people who are in pain or who have something in their life that they want to feel a little bit more at ease with. I love working with new teachers. So I would love to, at one point I did teach for a 200-hour teacher training, and I would love to do that again. I want to continue to mentor new teachers and get into like those sort of nuances of the hows of teaching, which is like a different thing than teaching itself. I would love to continue my work with dancers and maybe work a little more frequently with dancers, and help them use yoga to, again, like feel better in their bodies, but also to kind of decompress in their minds and de-stress. And I'm looking forward to more retreats in the future too, and getting to like travel and do yoga as a pair. So there's a lot that I'm looking forward to. And, I have to say too, I've for a long time wanted to do prenatal and postnatal yoga trainings. So that's something that I hope to do maybe in the next like year or two.
Nice. Well, all of those things you shared sounds very exciting. And also I can hear that you're also very passionate about. So thank you so much for sharing that. And maybe tell the listener how they can find you if they want to reach out to you, or if you have any future offering you want to share. So just tell us how people can find you.
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram at Marisa Martin _ My name is spelled Marisa. My website is marisaemartin.com. And my email is marisaemartin@gmail.com. And I have a few things coming up. In the fall, I'm going to be running again this mentorship program. That's a 3-month program through House of Flow with my friend Reika, who I mentioned. And that can be done in person in New York or online. And then I have a retreat to the Catskills happening. It's a weekend retreat over the fall equinox, which I'm excited for, which is so nice to think about balance and turning inwards. So that's happening September 20th to the 22nd of this year of 2024. And then we haven't announced it yet, but we will soon. We're going to be going to Greece in July of 2025, which is kind of unbelievable to even have something planned for then. But that's going to be coming up too. So I'll post all of that on like my socials and my website and stuff. But yeah, I'd be happy to connect with any other yoga teachers. Reika, you and I were talking about before we started recording, it's like hard sometimes to connect with other yoga teachers when you're teaching full time, which is kind of ironic, but oftentimes you're teaching at the same time in different places, or if you're in the same place, you're not teaching at the same time. One of you is coming and one of you is going. So I really appreciate what you're doing with this podcast to connect teachers and to kind of, keep that spirit of community alive, which is so important, especially in yoga. So I also really value getting to connect with other teachers. And so I'm grateful for you to give me the opportunity to be here too.
Of course. Thank you so much. I'm so happy that we got to have this time to have this conversation together. I feel like we were just sitting at a coffee shop and having conversation, and we have so much in common with our teaching career path. And it was really fun for me to chat with you. So thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. And I'll make sure to link everything you said on the show notes. Thank you, Marisa, for your time. And I have a great time in Europe and your retreat, but also your time off, your vacation and your dance, everything together. So have so much fun.
Thanks so much, Reika, and enjoy your time in Peru. And hopefully I'll see you in the real world one day.
Yes, I hope so too. you enjoyed this interview, the conversation I had with Marisa. If you got any inspiration out of this conversation, or anything that kind of lit you up, or anything you really felt you resonated with, or maybe more questions that came up for you from this interview, feel free to message me. My Instagram is at Reika Yoga. That's where I'm mostly active on. Or you can also message me through my website, through my contact form, www.reikayoga.com. And what would be most beneficial and helpful for me in terms of this podcast is for you to share this podcast, for share this episode with your friends, your coworkers, your fellow yoga teachers, anyone you think would benefit or enjoy this kind of conversation I have with yoga teachers weekly. So it'll be amazing if you could share this podcast with your friends and your community. Otherwise, leaving a positive review on whatever platform you listen to this podcast from. If you're listening on Spotify, subscribing, or I guess following, is also very beneficial as well. Yeah, so I hope you enjoyed this week's interview, and otherwise, I will speak to you next week. Talk to you soon.